The work of Vincent Messen is quite interesting from this point because he speaks about a kind of experimental historiography in dealing with this archival object in traveling. The second point that with Luisa we focused is the fact that what this critical approach can add to our project are something to do with the way in which aesthetics can open up something that has to do with the imagination, utopian dimension, and more also in some way poetical approach to our the theme of our research, and more generally question about the transcultural memory, migration, and mobility. The second is something that has to do with the non-discursive register of art and artistic work, and in particular with the relevance of visual and corporeal memory. The fact that most of them, this, for example, is a big difference between Beeman and Messen. Messen emphasized the idea of the individual subject, while Beeman, for example, has a more global and collective approach. And the last point is something that we can call kind of subjectivation, both of the object and the subject of research. For example, the idea of this theorist called Catherine Russell that speak about a new kind of ethnographic research based on an aesthetical intervention in form of field works in the field of social sciences. Yes, these are three possible points where we can see a kind of disjuncture of thought between what visual artists can really add in terms of fantasizing, imagination, etc.
And then we will add just 2 points from a methodological point of view, which are, I have noticed that the point of convergence between art and research is very different for each artist. So, for instance, just examples, but in the case of Liliana's work on Messens, there is the question of the performativity of the archive. So, and therefore, archival research work, which is very different from field work, very different. Then in the case of Beeman, there is the question of mobility, especially across the Mediterranean, but really across the world. And I will also add that Bushra Khalili's work has a number of other aspects, like crossing with literary work. She has her interviewees not talk with their own words, but very often talk with the words of Albert Camus or Leopold Senghor, some of the great Africanists. And so there is an effect of another contamination with the theater, really, and the performance. So the question of performance comes up over and over again, which I'm not sure what it can mean in our work, to be performative. And you have a last methodology.
Yes, the last point was kind of the opposite direction in which this methodological insight can be retranslated within our work. So, for example, because one of the problematic things is that this research-based art usually discuss compared to art historians, art critics, and never, for example, with historians or really with anthropologists, etc. So I was thinking, for example, on my research on this film Eva Nera, in which this idea of making the archive moving physically for me has been a great source of inspiration in a different way in which one can work and manipulate the archive. So what kind of of inspiration we can take from this artist that has to do with methodological moving in our...
So this was the first point we had, the general point. And so shall we give some time to comments or questions about this, and then we go on to the other two points, and then we can discuss generally.
Is it possible to very shortly repeat the first point? Because
Yes, of course. The first point was the challenge is for us what kind of distinctive approach to visual artworks can we put into practice from a cultural history perspective. So we are not art historians, we are not art critics, cultural historians. What does it mean?
Yeah.
Can we find convergences between their work and ours, or differences? We do see some convergences, but that has to be made explicit. Have you found this in your work?
yes, to me it's very interesting to work with artists or to collect narratives from artists and to reflect on migration by talking about their artwork, because it's such a different... It's hard to explain in words because it's such a visual way of communicating. But
Any example you have in mind?
well, I have an example from someone who wouldn't self-identify as an artist, but who makes videos, and he, for example, made a video about his journey to the Netherlands, and he did it very simply because he doesn't have the means to make a very beautiful film, and the way he portrays it, it's on the one hand informative but also emotional and somehow very accessible to a broad public, very personal. And I don't know if that is the main thing. I mean, there are other characteristics of art than these visual ways of portraying some transition you go through. Yeah. I don't. Maybe we can think of more aspects of art that do something to the viewer. It's. I mean, what art does or visual does is it appeals to emotions and experiences, and puts it in a very different context. And what Milica and I have discussed is that it's for the artists themselves, it's a very positive way to deal with reality and very somehow appealing to their humanities. There's, for example, someone I interviewed who said it was, for her, it was the only way to become human through art, because of all the negative and stereotypical images you have about Syrian refugees. She was from Syria, so yeah.
Maybe I can add also something to that, connected to the points you raised. What really resonated for me was when you mentioned the way in which aesthetics can open up imagination or present this kind of utopian vision, and you also mentioned that this non-discursive register of visual art, and I think those two are really important points also for me personally in my work so far. I always remember something that Rosi Braidotti has written when she said that the arts, and especially the visual arts, have some kind of a head start over theory and over critical thinking. And what you mean, and I subscribe to that notion, actually. I really take it to heart also in my work. And what I think she means by that is that the arts and the creative spirits have found a way to make problems in society appear as urgent while not making use of language, because language discourse is already coded, is already part of some kinds of establishments, and is in a way very linear. So what the arts can do and what visual arts can do is, for example, in the maps that we ask our interviewees to produce, often I see a conflation of past and present into one drawing, and different kinds of geographical locations, of course, into one point or one moment or one kind of conflated memory. That is something that is a space that art can offer a person, which we cannot really find in discourse or through language. So I think if we want to play with this non-linearity and use it also in our work and see how it can still work for us convincingly in presenting our research or our argument, I think we can turn to these works that we have collected and see what they do, and see if we can extract some kind of methodology from there.
Shall we go on? I mean, you prefer that everybody presents and then go on with, or do you have points pertinent to this?
I try to say something.
But on your point or on this? I mean, just to
yes, it's intertwined, but I don't know if
For the discussion.
See, in the discourse, but I don't know if it is possible.
So
no?
the second point,
No.
we're not entering the
Is
second. This is the first.
It's the first,
Okay.
yes. If I think to my 4 biographies of artists, artists born from 51 to 69 in Peru, Uruguay, Albania, and Italy. What come out relating to this discourse is the artists look as a bearer of cultural memory. Then Leslie, I think, will better explain what this means. There's artist as a memorial figure and a narrator who self-reflect on his individual and the collective stories and on his life cycle too. Cultural memory that is marked by images, figures, reminiscences, sidelights that are never static but always in movement, in progress. Cultural memory that is always in tension with passages, crossing, transit, continuities, discontinuities. All this is deeply intertwined with the founded moment of the construction of the artist identity. One example, the case of Coco Cano, an Uruguayan artist. Coco identifies the beginning of the vision, a vision that led him to contemplate a collective and social perspective of art as politics. He identified the beginning in the extended family structure in which he grew up, a family of more than 20 people. Here we are really facing the issue of initiation of the look of the art. This is very complex category. Art conceived as an intersubjective and shared space. I bring another example. For example, Adrian Paci, an outstanding visual artist born in Scutari in Albania in 1979, from which escaped in 1907 after the Kosovo War and the Milosevic dictatorship. Paci affirms that the Milosevic dictatorship wanted to cancel the force of noble people. Not by chance, its first work is a video shot in Milan with his 3-year-old daughter. His daughter tells fairy tales in Albanian languages. He starts as an artist with the video in Albanian language. The title of the videos is Albanian Story. So in the hierarchy of the cultural memory, great relevance assumes the recovery of heritage, always conceived in an intersection and in an intertwined dimension. This is the artwork reveals itself as a trace of ethic and poetry category on which we worked with Fabrice Dubosc.
Can I just ask one small point that for me very important, that one of the trouble or the difficulty is when we move from the methodological level to the kind of context and how can I say, specific material on which these artists work. For example, Messen works on this image coming from the traveling from France to Burkina Faso, and then this self-critique of his own Barthian heritage.
Mm-hmm.
How can I connect this with the field of our research? So what is the, I don't know if I can make me be clear, but I think that some of them are very interesting on a methodological level, but are less connected with our objects of research. Otherwise, others are more explicit on possible links that are maybe geographical areas, kind of migration to Italy. So this is for me a very relevant problem, for example, that moved me more from the beginning to, for example, to focus on artists that in some way deal with the Italian colonial and post-colonial history, while the first were more random. What kind of artists were interesting for different reasons.
I would like to say something about this point of methodologies, different methodologies from artists, from research, scientific research point of view, that is our point of view. But sometimes I have the impression during the field work and with some artists that our methodologies could be dialogue. I don't know, and sometimes I feel that I was really in a border between the artistic methodology and the scientific methodology, and where is that border? I mean, I don't know, sometimes I'm not an artist, of course, but sometimes I thought that this kind of methodology could be the methodology of the artist, not in all the approach and in all the context. For example, during the interview of a Peruvian artist in Stockholm, in Sweden, I decided to share some visual materials from migrants, and he immediately found the concept to name it this kind of visual materials, and he told me, this is art naive. This is naive. This is art, and this is naive. And then I make it naive. I make some research about this,
And I think it's not a bad idea, because the art naive is free of conventions. The art naive is conceived and produced by artists with not specific academic preparation. So in our cases, now when we proposed to the migrants to narrate first their history of life and then to produce some visual image, sometimes this kind of art comes up. I mean, not in everybody, but in some works that is present, I think. So this border between our work and their work, I don't know, sometimes it's not clear.
I'm very glad you brought up this point, but I'm very strongly against the idea of art naive for these works. I think a more productive, first of all, the naives like Rousseau or others. It's not true that they are free. They follow other canons, and therefore they appeal to the primitive. And that was something that started at a certain point with Picasso and other pointers. And there is a whole trend of naive art. So to say that, to consider them as free, I understand why the artist said that. It's different canon than his. But the naive artist is free from his canon, but vice versa. And I think that also the category of art is not correct for the material we collect. And this is a point that some of the artists I interviewed made. But of course, this is a point of discussion. However, in our methodological and theoretical approach, I am against defining it as art, and I think it's not fruitful. On the contrary, because indeed it would create some problems for a cultural historical interpretation. Because if you have, let us suppose you study from the point of view of cultural history something that is certainly hard. At least, what does it mean, it's certainly hard? It's recognized by a large public of people and critics and institutions, individuals as art. It's always a question of recognition. There is no, we cannot say we accept an aesthetic canon. But then, what is cultural history expected to say about this? Very different than cultural history studying something that is not necessarily an artistic product, but it is seen from the point of view of the cultural context and meaning and so on. So even
but
for
visuality, no, the bridge is more visuality than art.
Art is, you say it's more the bridge between what?
The material that some of us are collecting
yes.
with the interviews and artistic works. So, for example, I'm thinking what Leslie, this artist in Barcelona, that gave you this to me, this is art, because it's something that he was doing on himself. While when we ask to the interviewees to draw or make other things, it's difficult to call it art, because the creative impulse is not coming from them, but from our request.
And so visuality
And the
is a
point of
bridge.
view is not free
Yeah.
in this case.
Visuality does not have an implication of value like art,
No.
the word art has.
Yeah.
But the other point is that I've been thinking for a while to ask you, Leslie, to write something on this question I'm going to mention now, which is other people, when presented with our drawings, have said something similar to what your artist said. Said, these are sort of childish drawings. Childish. So again, I'm very strongly against this definition because it's an apparent similarity. And I was thinking whether you could write even a page, half a page, on the difference between these drawings or whatever they are, and the ones you have collected from children? Because I think they are deeply different.
In fact, in my opinion, there's of course the question of recognition, but also of discourse, in the sense of production of discourse. What is art? Art is what we define as art. Means this is art, this is not art. So maybe the question for me, I think, was that one about using a source, and in general artistic sources, in another historical perspective. And
Is or is not?
is of course. After working on mapping in the Mediterranean journeys, I was, how to say, I tried to invent something that could connect the idea of mapping in interviews, and on the other hand artistic works. And for example, the result was emotional geography, in the sense that emotional geography can be useful in order to see the mapping in videos, in artistic representations, but also to connect different kind of memories, visual and oral memories. This could be interesting in my opinion.
I think we have started to discuss some of the crucial points. Would it be appropriate at this point to add some more from the point of view of art and activism?
Sure. We talked about this yesterday also a little bit. For this intervention, I guess we really departed from the kind of material we encountered during our fieldworks. And that material, at least in my case, I see it falling broadly. I don't want to categorize, but nevertheless I see different kinds of trends, different ways of using art, presenting art being received and recognized, that I think we need to be mentioned. And I have specific examples with each one. So at some kind of first level, I see art as activism primarily, such as, for example, in this connected to this group of undocumented refugees called We Are Here, who are residing in and around Amsterdam as they keep being relocated by the officials. So these people are undocumented and have been for many years in the Netherlands. It's not. So they have no right to jobs, housing, health, insurance, security, and so on. So a lot of domains are close to them, and what they have found is, and in this way they become invisible,